We believe that some stories must be challenged.
And our discussion today, it really zeroes in on a story that presents a profound challenge to anyone who reads it. John Irving's The Cider House Rules. We're not just looking at it as a great novel, we're treating it as a complex, a really sustained moral argument.
And that's exactly the mission here. We've got a whole stack of sources, critiques, scholarly articles, our own analysis, and we're running them through some established frameworks.
Right.
We're using a critical thinking model to ask, is the argument clear? Is it deep? Is it fair? And then we're also applying an intellectual ethics framework, using ideas of liberty and justice from things like the U.S. preamble and the Golden Rule.
And that's so important because fiction, even though it's all imagined, it gives us this perfect, controlled lab to look at the moral architecture of reality.
A controlled lab, I like that.
It sets up these impossible scenarios, things we'd never allow in real life, so we can really test our principles against human desperation.
So let's frame the central question this book is posing. I think the big hook really is this. What does this book claim about justice when the official rules, the ones written down in law books, completely fail to protect the most vulnerable? And what happens when that failure forces compassionate people to just improvise life and death decisions on their own?
Well, the book's claim is incredibly blunt. It's set in this orphanage in Maine, St. Cloud's, before and after World War II. And beneath all the story, the core argument is that when society restricts a woman's agency, it doesn't get rid of the need for abortion. It just makes it incredibly dangerous.
It just pushes the cost onto someone else.
Exactly. So if the state refuses to bear that burden of desperation, someone has to. And the book argues that bearing that burden, even illegally, is a kind of moral calling.
It boils everything down to that one daily choice that Dr. Larch faces, an orphan or an abortion.
That's it. And that choice is the absolute center of Dr. Wilbur Larch's work. He runs St. Cloud's. He delivers the unwanted babies, but he also performs safe, illegal abortions. He doesn't see himself as a criminal at all.
No, he sees himself as a humanitarian, right? He's just filling a gap that the system has created.
A gap left by what he would call systemic failure.
And his personal view is, well, it's radical for the time. He sees anti-abortion laws not as protecting life, but as a sanctimonious, self-righteous form of violence against women.
That phrase is a claim in itself, a claim about the gap between legal intention and actual real-world effect. And if we look at it through that intellectual ethics lens, the central idea is that laws, and even our own conscience, have to be judged by their real, tangible effects on human lives.
Especially on women with very few options.
Yes. Larch's whole operation is a response to seeing women show up maimed or dying from botched procedures. For him, the law is just a theory. His work is brutally practical.
And that leads right into the whole structure of the novel, this split between official rules and improvised rules.
That's the core device. You have the official rules, written by people far away who mean well but don't understand. And then you have the life and death rules, made up on the spot by the people who have to live with the consequences.
The title itself is the biggest symbol of that.
Oh, completely. Right. When the workers see the Cider House Rules posted by the owners, they just reject them. They don't accept that people who don't live their lives and do their work get to tell them how to behave. It's a perfect little political allegory.
And by setting it up that way, Irving gets to argue through evidence. He doesn't just tell you prohibition is bad. He shows you in really visceral detail what it produces.
The maiming, the deaths, the sheer terror of women who are trapped.
Right. And using our critical thinking framework, Irving is constantly holding this up to the standard of relevance. Does a policy actually reduce suffering, or does it just make the lawmaker feel pure? The story seems to argue that if the consequences don't matter to you, your law is unethical.
Which is why Homer Wells is such a crucial character. He's the moral counterweight. He's the orphan Larch raises to take over for him.
But Homer refuses. For the longest time, he just refuses to perform abortions. That's his own test of individual conscience.
Yeah, he'll do the obstetrics, he'll help with adoptions, the good part of Larch's work. But he draws this firm moral line. He believes that by refusing, he can keep his own hands clean.
But Larch's argument against that is so powerful. He basically says that refusing to help when you're the only one who can, that's not neutral.
Not at all. It's a choice in itself, and often a very privileged one.
So using that critical thinking language again, Homer's early position is almost egocentric. He's trying to protect his own moral self-image, even if it pushes the risk back onto the women.
He's shielding himself from the messiness of it all. But what's so interesting is how he changes.
It's not an intellectual debate that sways him.
No, it's direct, unavoidable experience. It only happens when he's faced with a young girl who will absolutely suffer without his specific medical skill.
And that encounter forces him to shift his standard. He moves away from protecting his personal purity to a new standard, being of use.
The abstract ideal gives way to the practical ethic. Homer realizes it's not about how clean his own conscience is. It's about whether his actions reduce harm in the actual world. That's the engine of the story.
This whole method of building an argument through character and experience is incredibly effective. It's worth noting, you are experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation powered by Google's Notebook LM for deeper, more dynamic book summaries.
And if you're looking for more resources like this, things like AI book analysis, summaries, critiques that can help you reflect and think rationally, you can find them on Mindful Moments, our YouTube channel. It's also a great resource for aspiring authors.
So Homer makes this shift from self to utility, and it seems to solve his internal problem. But it opens up this huge external one, which is the book's deep and honestly uncomfortable gender asymmetry.
Yes, the book is very deliberate about centering that inequality. Women bear all the consequences, the pregnancy, the stigma, the danger, while the men, doctors, lovers, lawmakers, they hold all the power.
And that's a fair critique of the book, isn't it? That even in a novel about women's agency, the story is ultimately about a male protagonist having to have his moral awakening first.
It is a valid critique. Homer has to say yes before that agency is really confirmed. The story reflects the very gatekeeping it's trying to expose.
But at the same time, its moral power is that it forces you to apply these bigger principles to that unfairness.
Absolutely. If you look at it through the lens of the Golden Rule or the preamble's promise of liberty and justice, the argument is solid. It shows very clearly how women are denied equal protection under laws made by people who will never have to face their choices.
Let's talk about the setting for a minute, St. Cloud's itself. The orphanage is such a powerful symbol.
It is. It's orderly. It's very paternalistic. Larsh runs it like his own little kingdom. But it's also a necessary refuge in a world that just abandons these children and their mothers.
And the power is in the contrast, right? The orphanage is clean, it's medically safe, and that's set against the horror of the back alley procedures happening outside.
The narrative uses that clean medical environment to sort of elevate the act. It frames compassionate abortion as a necessary public health service, not some dirty secret crime.
And our sources say that really provoked some people.
Yeah.
Religious critics attacked the book for treating it almost like a sacramental moment.
Which just shows how effective the symbolism was. It totally changed the moral feeling of the act.
And then we come back to the Cider House Rules themselves, the symbol at the heart of it all.
The workers read that long list of pointless rules and they take them down and burn them.
A simple act.
A simple act that rejects the whole idea that outsiders get to dictate their survival. They insist on making their own moral code, one based on their shared reality, not some abstract list from an owner who isn't there.
You know, we should also touch on how emotion works as a kind of reasoning in this story.
That's a great point. Fear, shame, gratitude. They aren't just feelings. They're tools that guide the characters' choices. The revulsion they feel at botched abortions is what steers them toward Larch's compassion, even though it's illegal.
But the book is also careful to show the other side. It shows how moral panic and disgust can be used as weapons against women's autonomy to justify the very laws that create all the suffering.
Right. It shows emotional maturity when feeling leads to deeper insight, but immaturity when it's just used to protect the observer's comfort.
So philosophically, the book comes down pretty hard on one side. It's a consequentialist ethic.
Very much so. The moral weight is on reducing suffering and respecting women's agency in the real world. It doesn't ignore abstract principles, but it insists they have to come second to actual outcomes.
But here's the tension. If Larch is forging records and lying to everyone to keep his system going, isn't the whole thing built on dishonesty? How does that square with a principle like establishing justice?
And that is the exact uncomfortable place the novel wants you to be. It suggests that Larch's deception, while legally dishonest, is ethically necessary to achieve a higher good protecting lives.
So it puts virtue and survival in direct opposition.
Yes. And it argues that in a broken system, sometimes the greater virtue demands the lesser lie.
One thing the book does incredibly well, though, is stage this debate fairly. The characters who are uncomfortable with abortion, their feelings are genuine. They aren't just straw men.
No, they aren't villains. They're depicted as struggling, confused people, which makes the book so much more complex and, I think, enduring.
It's that complexity that makes it so perfect for this kind of analysis. We can be sympathetic to the book's aims while still being critical of its structure.
So when we apply our narrative logic model, the book scores very high on clarity. You always know what the central question is. It scores high on depth. It traces consequences across decades. And it's fair in how it portrays the moral struggle.
But where does the critique say it falls short?
Arguably, in breadth. It does a brilliant job with class disparity, the difference between a rich woman's options and a poor woman's. But it pays much less attention to how race and gender intersect around reproductive control. Its focus is a little narrower than a modern critique might demand.
In the end, though, the book's lasting lesson, what it really offers you is this powerful idea that neutrality is never actually neutral.
It's a choice. In the face of someone else's desperation, choosing to do nothing is a choice, and it's usually a privileged one that allows the suffering to continue.
In an idea that resonates so strongly with that preamble aspiration to promote the general welfare, not just stand by.
Exactly. This story teaches that moral responsibility is simply inescapable. It forces you to ask, what happens to a society when its highest virtues are put in direct opposition to basic survival, and which one should give way?
Click the link on screen to subscribe, share, purchase via link, and think rationally.
See the many genre-based book podcasts at Mindful Moments. Subscribe and nourish your mind on the go.